And now, please join me in welcoming Joe Zadeh, VP of Product at Airbnb, and Neil Ungerleider, reporter at Fast Company.
Hi, I'm here with Joe Zadeh, VP Product, Airbnb. And quick question for the audience. Who here has stayed in an Airbnb property for leisure travel? That's a really good portion of the audience. And who here has stayed at Airbnb for business travel? That's a really good portion of the audience too. And if Joe has his way, a lot more of you are going to be using Airbnb for business travel, which is a big part of what we're going to be speaking about today. And my first question for you is if you can tell the audience a bit more about the matching product Airbnb rolled out and a bit about how it came to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. About a month ago, we launched a brand new version of our entire mobile app on the guest side. And it does a lot of things, like it helps you find the right neighborhood, it helps you find the right things to do. We have new guidebooks, which are curated by locals. And those things help you find the right place to stay without ever having to leave the mobile app. But the thing that we're most excited about is that it took a major step forward with what we call matching. And probably the best way to describe matching is to contrast it to searching. Obviously, Google, world-class in search. If I go to Google and I want to look for a cat, I type in the word cat, most relevant thing comes to me. It's a picture of a cat, Wikipedia page. But matching is completely different in that it's two-sided because we're a two-sided marketplace. And so what we have to do is really understand what makes every guest unique and special. For example, me and my mom have completely different tastes in places. My mom should not be staying in an artist colony in Brooklyn. That's maybe okay for me. And then on the host side, we want to make sure that hosts have a say on who stays in their place, because not all guests are the right guests for them. They want to make sure it's the right stay, but also that the right stay means they're going to get better reviews, more business. And so we're investing in getting more explicit information from guests and hosts so we can match them better together. And then the hope is that our algorithms and our machine learning will learn with every single stay, do we do a good job matching? Do we not do a good job matching and improve? So every stay makes the entire platform better. And the net is that when two people search on Airbnb, they see radically different things depending on their behavior, but also who they are, and also what the host is looking for. And we want to become experts at this and make this one of our key competencies.
And when you're dealing with these huge data sets and Airbnb, a service with lots of customers, how do you train the algorithms for that? How do you make sure everything's accurate? How do you make sure that when it's ready for prime time, an initiative like this is ready to go from day one?
Yeah, the top thing is you start with world-class talent. We knew we wanted to be world-class at this, and so we knew we had to get world-class talent. So over the years, we've been building a lot of muscle in doing this. This launch was the first time we were ever really public about it, but we've been training that muscle behind the scenes for quite some time. So a couple years ago, we started studying implicit preferences of hosts. So a host can say, oh, I want a short stay, I want a long stay, but they may act differently. And so we started writing algorithms that could detect that, hey, this host is not accepting anyone for a short stay, so let's stop showing them guests, or stop showing them two guests when they want a short stay. And we started seeing that their business started going up. All hosts were benefiting from this change. And so it's been a very, very iterative process, but with this launch, it was the first time we ever did it sort of publicly and now gathering more information up front. So one of the new things we're doing coming back to business travel is that we're getting more information about what kind of stay that you want. What kind of neighborhood, lively or hip? What's the purpose? Are you going for a wedding? You're going to go for business. And if it's for business, we can direct you more to some of our business-ready listings that have 24-hour check-in that might be more appropriate for that kind of stay. The tension is the more information that we collect, obviously conversion can drop, but we believe that if we can counteract that with higher relevance and better stays, not only does that make up for it, also drives more growth through word of mouth. If people love the experience that they have, they'll tell their friends and more people will come.
And we were talking a little about this backstage, and as far as business travelers having different habits, so you're able to see that freelancers many of the time have different needs, different interests than someone at, let's say, a medium or large-sized company.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that freelancers are a big use case for business travel, but we're starting to see like a new case arise where, when people travel for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even for a couple of months on business, they don't necessarily want to stay somewhere very bland. They want to go live somewhere. And living somewhere is so incredibly important. Like, it's a difference between going to coffee in the lobby, getting coffee in the lobby every day in the same place versus having that special coffee shop that the locals do. Like, I have the coffee shop that I love outside my apartment, and why should business travelers not have the same access to that when they're going abroad for business?
Which is interesting because you guys in the exact same category as Yelp, TripAdvisor, and other sites.
So one of the things that makes us really different is that, take our guidebooks, for example. If you compare our guidebook entries to, say TripAdvisor's guide entries, TripAdvisor is curated by a lot of tourists that leave reviews. And I want to draw a major distinction between tourism and travel. I think, when you go to cities, you might want to go to the tourist areas and see, like in San Francisco, you might go to Fisherman's Wharf, and that's where everybody goes, get in the big red bus. But I think travel is really different. I think travel is seeing the world through the eyes of a local. And Airbnb is really poised to do that because you're staying in somebody's home. And so what we do is let our hosts say, hey, here are like the 5, 10 things around the neighborhood that I love to do. What's really interesting is that when you aggregate that across an entire city, you see a very different type of story emerge than you see on something that's maybe curated by sort of more mass tourism stays. And you start seeing some of the best restaurants. Actually, if you look at the top 10 things on the San Francisco guidebook or the LA guidebook, there are things that make up a perfect local's day in the city. And I think that's a major difference between tourism and travel, is that when you travel, you really step into the lives of the locals and you really see the city through their eyes, where I think that most of us, when we travel, we don't really get that experience.
And shifting gears for a minute, so you were a synthetic biology researcher at Caltech before you joined Airbnb.
This is correct, yeah.
So it's safe to say you were dealing with genetic engineering?
No, not necessarily genetic engineering. I have a computer science background, and I always got really interested in applying computer science to really hard problems. And so for some unknown reason, I decided to do a PhD, and spent about 7 years doing that, working on the next generation of therapeutics, and how can we use existing biology to create next generation medicine. And that was super exciting, but the other part of that was that I got really excited about building a complete web app that sat in front of a supercomputer. How can I make synthetic biology really, really easy to use? Turns out I liked that problem way more than the actual science of synthetic biology. So when I graduated, I decided to head out to Silicon Valley and try to join a startup. And I ended up meeting the founders of Airbnb and joining as the 3rd engineer and maybe like the 8th employee. And I got really excited by them because my whole life I had been doing science and technology, and I was getting more interested in design and art and building products for consumers. And I got really excited about sitting with 2 designers. We were working out of a small 3-bedroom apartment, sitting with 2 designers in a small bedroom working on the product. That was the entire product team. And that got me really excited and created this whole philosophy for me about how I think we should do product development, which is a really strong blend between art and science. And what I brought to Airbnb was rigorous Caltech science, but what I got from the founders was design and kind of completing my design education. And my current role is kind of a dream for me because I'm able to bring both together.
And what was it like doing the cultural shift from academia to the startup world in Airbnb?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Just adjusting to the different work culture, academia, of course, being very, very different from the startup world?
Yeah, I think my first 6 months out of my PhD were hard. In science, they train you, especially as a as a PhD student, you were like the quintessential individual contributor. You go off into a bubble, you work really deep, you validate every single detail, and you publish something, and you're the expert at that thing in the world. But maybe like 5 people in the world actually care about it. And that was a very big shift for me to, starting as an individual contributing engineer, but over time, transitioning to be a leader in the company, and which is oftentimes completely diametrically opposed to what you're taught to do as a scientist. But what I try to do is try to teach all the PMs this blend of art and science. And what I really believe is that you should start with a really audacious vision that's based in soul and humanity when you're building products. And oftentimes you can be data informed, but I think too often we're afraid to use our own intuition and judgment to, envision the future. I mean, if we had used all the data, Airbnb never would have existed, right? There's no data that ever would have said this is a good idea. But it ended up working because we started with a vision of what the world could look like, sharing each other's homes. But what I do is I also try to pair that with incredibly rigorous science, where you start with this vision, but then you have really clear goals, really clear hypotheses, and you iterate, validate. Sometimes you have to adjust your vision, but sometimes you should just stick to it and keep on it. And I find that process leads to the best outcomes. And so, example of this is, we launched this product called Smart Pricing recently, where hosts can set a minimum, maximum, and then step away, and Airbnb completely adjusts all their prices for them. To hosts, it's like magic. It didn't start that way, and the science never demonstrated it was a necessarily good idea. But what we did was that we started with this idea that hosts should be able to manage their place incredibly easily. Then we started building rudimentary models that showed that this was a good idea. And then we started going further and saying, what happens if we show people tips? And then we kept going further and said, okay, what if we just let hosts click a button and everything is managed for them? And what we found is that hosts were incredibly excited about this. Their prices are completely managed all the time, and their life just got so much easier. So if the Pope comes to town, their prices adjust automatically. If the Super Bowl comes to town, the prices adjust automatically. And when the Pope's gone, it comes back down. And that for hosts is such a peace of mind, because when everything is completely unique, how do you price something? It's really hard.
Right, so you have these algorithms for events like the papal visit, the Super Bowl, World Series, they're automatic for the hosts.
Right, based on what we see in the market. We see more data than anyone.
Now I'm curious, do you hear a lot of feedback from the hosts about that?
Yeah, if you had asked hosts if they up front if they ever would have opted into a product like this, they would have said no. But we gained their trust over time. Hosts want control of their storefront. Our hosts are micro entrepreneurs that are now hospitality entrepreneurs. And they want complete control. But when we can show them gradually that our tips are good and our tips get them more revenue, our tips get them more business, they start opting in. And now, when a host all of a sudden is making more money per month and getting better guests, then they're happier and they keep subscribing and telling their friends about it. And now we have hundreds of thousands of hosts that actually use this product.
And for Airbnb, you were telling me earlier, international expansion is a huge area for the company.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's different about Airbnb than maybe some other companies is that we're in travel, and travel is by definition international. Like, if I want a coffee, all that matters is that there's a coffee up there, there's a Starbucks up there. If I want to get a lift, all that matters is that there's a lift in a 1-mile radius. If I want to stay on Airbnb, it needs to be everywhere that I am not. It needs to be all around the world. And so we didn't do, back in the early days, we didn't do this sort of, city by city gradual rollout or market by market gradual rollout. We just were there. We weren't there in a great way. I mean, we weren't super translated at first, but we saw that people came to New York, liked staying on Airbnb. A little light bulb went off, like, wait, I'm here in New York, but my place is open. Why don't I go back and rent my place out next time I travel? And before you know it, we've created this global network. And that's important because travel needs to be a global network. And over time, we iterated and made it better. And we've kind of learned this principle of, it doesn't sound great, but we call it glocal, like global and local, because it's a unique problem for us. You have to be local enough that you can inspire trust, but you have to be global enough to inspire wanderlust. And so locally, if I'm in China and I want to travel, I need to see a sign-up method that works for me. Facebook doesn't make sense. WeChat makes sense. If I show Facebook, it doesn't create trust. If I am making a purchase in Europe, obviously everything has to be in euros, and I have to be able to pay in my native currency. But I might be in Europe going to stay with someone in Japan who doesn't speak English. And we have to make, or whatever language you're from your country, and we have to make sure that that guest understands that that the expectations are met. This person may not speak your language. And so simultaneously, we have to set expectations on a product that has to work globally, but get people to trust us on a very, very local level. And I think the combination of that can be incredibly powerful. And the combination of that is you come back from Japan, inspired with a new culture, having met a local, and the world actually just feels a little bit smaller.
And it sounds like the localization techniques really vary for different markets.
Yeah, some markets have to go deeper, some markets don't. I think one thing that we had to understand is like, what is a universal human trait versus what is a very local trait? Payment, sign-up methods, those are completely specific by country, and some countries require going an extra step to make it work. But this idea of hospitality, I think is universal. I think humans everywhere respond well to hospitality, and that's something that we enjoy investing in.
And as far as growth in these different markets, is the way people look at properties primarily the same way? Are there some areas where bookings are primarily mobile-driven, some areas where it's still through desktop browser, or is it really a mix everywhere?
It's really a mix everywhere. I mean, travel can be a very high-ticket item, and I think that to this day, a lot of people still want to book through web. We've seen a huge increase in mobile the last couple years. But you also see a case where someone starts on mobile and switches to web or vice versa. One thing that we've been really excited about for mobile have been our growth in Instant Book. Instant Book is where you don't have to go back and forth with a guest and host. You can just book it immediately. And maybe a couple years ago, we had about 35,000 Instant Book listings. As of now, we have close to 600,000 Instant Book listings around the world. And a lot of those can be booked within 24 hours, which is a very, very strong mobile use case. A lot of mobile travelers, they just want to book it now and check in.
I'm curious, how long more or less did Instabook take to develop and roll out?
It was an idea we had several years ago, but we've been rolling it out more and more over time. And we've been really focusing on it and giving hosts the controls they need to feel comfortable. I mean, Instant Book is saying to a host, you're going to give your keys to anyone in the world, and they want to have some controls on that. So some hosts say, I want guests that have an identity or a previous reputation. Some hosts say, I want these kinds of stays that are shorter stays. Or some hosts say, listen, I can be Instant Book for 7 days out, but do not Instant Book me within a day. And some hosts are the opposite. I want Instant Book same day. And so the more that we've given these tools to our hosts, our hospitality entrepreneurs, the more that they have invested and grown, and the more that this has grown. So now, you can book more than 500,000 listings anywhere in the world.
And the last thing I wanted to ask, we have a few minutes left, what are your favorite Airbnb stories?
So probably my favorite one, which I have to tell, is I had the first stay on Easter Island, which I think at the time was the most remote Airbnb stay of all time, which is also where I proposed to my wife, was right outside of that. And so that was a truly magical one. Another example is we woke up, I think we were in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica, and we had to hike across a river with our luggage over our head, and stayed in this jungle hut. It was glamping, but barely glamping, and it was a real transformational experience, especially for my wife, where she woke up and she had this epiphany that she should have more creativity in her life. I can't understand what triggered it. I think it was the macaws screeching outside the walls, but she came back and 6 months later had been down a different life trajectory where she decided to quit her job and pursue her passion as an entrepreneur. And she traces it all back to that experience. And I think, we often talk about in the tech industry our product being the mobile app or the web app, but the product that we sell on Airbnb is a complete experience of immersing yourself somewhere and living somewhere. And that can be transformational for people, especially if done well and done through the local lens of someone who lives there. And I think that can really make people in some ways even better people because they expand out of what they know.
Joe, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe and Neil.